Hi everyone, my name is Nancy, and I am a software developer at Wrangle.io. And for those of you who don't know about Wrangle, we are a software consulting agency, and we partner with companies and help build applications together. Through the past 3 years I've worked at Wrangle, I had the pleasure to work with various companies across vastly different industries. And even though they have really different code bases, they're building really different applications, one thing tends to occur over and over again, and that relates to quality. And for some of our clients, it could become such a big blocker that it would delay the ability for them to release any new features, for them to be able to get any bug fixes in, and this can be really costly for your company. And this is why I'm really excited about this topic, because having a good testing strategy really helps you ensure the success of your business. So I want to start off with what we expect to see as a good testing strategy. I'm sure this isn't the first time you've seen the testing pyramid. So at the bottom here, we have our unit tests, and ideally, we want to have a lot of these unit tests. And as we move up the pyramid, we start to have less and less of these integration tests and ETE, and we know that as we go down the pyramid, it becomes a lot less effort to maintain, to build them. But on the other hand, as we move up the pyramid, we gain more and more confidence from these tests that we write. But although this is our expectation of good testing strategies, this is typically not what we see. So what we actually see with a lot of the clients we work with is something like this, where we invest heavily in writing a lot of unit tests. And we do have our occasional ETE tests to secure our core features. But there's no place for integration tests here. And what this really causes is anytime we want to release a new feature, we have to go back and ensure to do a lot of manual testing, regression testing, to make sure that all of our features are being tested and not just the ones that are covered by ETE tests. Something else that we often see as well is this heavy commitment to doing a ton of ETE tests. And this tends to look like having dedicated teams to write and manage ETE tests. Sometimes these will be full-time test engineers just writing ETE tests. And the problem with this is that over time, as your application gets more complex, as your endpoint change or your users change, these become really, really troublesome to maintain. And often what we see is that clients tends to abandon a lot of the ETE tests that were written previously because they just become too troublesome to maintain. And then we get the occasional full investment into unit tests. We don't need anything else. And what we see with these clients is that they tend to spend an insane amount of time doing regression testing because there's really no sure way to know that our system is working despite having hundreds of these unit tests. And we get the occasional, only manual test. So what we're seeing here is really just a lack of integration tests. And what that really does to our testing strategy is that we're not actually testing to see if the features we're building are actually working, because it can be really costly to be investing, testing every single feature that we build with ETE tests, but we know that our unit tests cannot cover complex features that we're building and cannot reliably tell us that these features are working. So why aren't we writing more integration tests? We know they're great, we know the benefits, everybody tells us we need to write them, but why aren't we seeing more companies actually adopting integration tests into their strategy? I think there's a couple of reasons why. So one reason why is that integration tests tends to be really difficult to define. What does integration mean? Like, what are we integrating? Right? What part of the integration are we talking about? Are we talking about components and services? Are we talking about integration between components, and then several components with the service? So it's really hard to tell where to draw the line. So you get the most return on your effort invested in. Another reason is that integration tests can be really hard to understand for non-technical stakeholders. So this is what a typical integration test may look like for an Angular application. And if you're not somebody who wrote this code or who is not familiar with doing Angular integration tests, this just looks like a bunch of gibberish to you. And imagine your non-technical stakeholders coming in, debating whether or not to invest in this type of testing. This is really hard. Like, we don't know what we're actually testing. It says that we're testing to see if the title was entered, but these steps are not very clear. And this is true, I think, from almost all types of integration tests, is that mocks become so difficult to set up, and they're so difficult to maintain. Especially as your application grows, you start adding in more complex features, you just start having to mock more things. And you have more JSONs, and then those APIs change, or those features change, and you have to go back through your hundreds of JSONs to figure out how to get your test to pass again. And this, at some point, becomes almost just as frustrating to deal with as your ETE tests. So how do we actually approach writing good integration tests? So we have 3 steps here. The first step is that we write integration tests based on actual acceptance criteria from our user stories. So here we might have a typical user story. To identify what we actually want to be testing, we look at what is actually part of the acceptance criteria. It's really important to note here that we want to be writing integration tests as part of our development time. And this is really different from ETE, where we have to wait until a whole complete feature is done or our whole entire flow is done. Integration tests can be written while we're developing, and this is really key. So what this allows us to do is that we're actually testing against real features. We're not just testing if 2 functions integrate well together or one component integrates with another component. These are based off of real business values. And this helps everybody on the team understand what needs to be tested, and there's no guesswork into, well, maybe I want to test these 2 components and not the service. The second thing we want to do is we want to simulate as much of the front-end experience as possible. And we want to mock the back-end interactions. So for those of you who are familiar with Cypress, this is what the Cypress UI looks like. And this is what we want out of our integration test. We want to be able to actually simulate how a real user would use your application. And the importance here is because it allows everyone on the team to clearly understand what we're testing. That's not just our developers, it's not just our QAs, but all of our stakeholders at the company can understand that these are the steps that we're taking in order to get our pass or our fail on our test. And it gives everybody confidence that the features we're building are actually there and they're actually working. It's also important for us to mock our backend here because it makes our front end faster and more stable. And here when we're doing integration tests, we're really checking the integration of our entire front end. If we add in our backend, if there's any changes in the API or there is an error in the backend, that will make our front end tests come up with false positives or false negatives. And there's no real way to reliably rely on your integration tests. So the last one is use Cypress. How many of you guys here have heard of Cypress or are currently? OK, that's amazing. So I don't have to convince you that you should use Cypress. But traditionally, people see Cypress as an E2E tool, and it's an amazing E2E tool. And for those of you who have never heard of Cypress, there's a bunch of great reasons why you should. So setting up Cypress only takes minutes instead of days, right? You don't have to pick your assertion libraries or frameworks, your Selenium wrappers. Cypress comes with one install and very little setup. Syntax is really easy to understand with Cypress, and it's super easy for your developers to pick up. And this is really crucial because we want developers to be writing these integration tests during the development process, and this makes it easy for anybody who knows JavaScript to be able to pick this up. For the people in the audience who have never seen Cypress's UI, it's really amazing. And they've really built an interface just for the needs of debugging and being able to see what is actually happening when you're running the test. And with Cypress, they also give you a lot of capabilities that you would typically expect from unit tests, such as being able to skip tasks, being able to focus on running a certain task, which really helps you test as you're developing and not just sort of doing it afterwards. I think one of the more underrated features of Cypress is its ability to allow you to mock and stub, and that comes right out of the box. So Cypress provides a couple of methods, sci-server, sci-route, and sci-stub, that allows you to record HTTP requests and then subsequently stub them. And they also come with a really nice UI to actually tell you when you're using your mocks versus when you're actually hitting the real endpoint, which is kind of nice. So when I was first looking into doing integration testing, potentially with Cypress, I realized that the ability to mock and stub is only really half the equation. The really challenging portion about maintaining mocks is actually figuring out where you're going to store them, how you're going to update them, what if they're no longer needed, how do I identify what to delete, and how do I deal with these hundreds of mocks that come auto-recorded? So what I did was I wrote a couple of functions that leverages the methods that come out of the box with Cypress, and I eventually turned that into a plugin. So Cypress Auto Record is the plugin that kind of came out of all my experimentations into using Cypress for integration tests, and it kind of goes a step further, which really just takes all of the managing your mocks and the updating your mocks out of the equation. And you no longer have to figure out how to do that portion. So I know I talked a lot about why we do integration tests, how we would do it. Let's actually write one right now so you can see for yourself that it doesn't actually have to be so difficult. So for this demo, I'm going to be using the real-life Angular application that's out there. For those of you who have never seen this application, essentially it's kind of like a Twitter clone. You're able to sign in, you're able to follow other users, and you can see their posts. And I just want to note here that even though this is an Angular demo, Cypress is framework agnostic, so you can use this for your React app, your Vue app, or your just vanilla JS app. So the first step is identifying what we actually want to test. So here I wrote a user story that you would typically expect from building out a feature like this. So as a logged in user, I would like to see posts from users I'm following on my dashboard. And my acceptance criteria is really, as being able to log in and landing on the Yours Feed tab, and then being able to see this post from this user that I am following. So this is what the actual feature looks like. So I'm entering in my email and password. I'm signing in, and I should be able to see my post. So the first step to getting our test set up is we're going to add both Cypress and Cypress Auto Record plugin. And to do that, all we have to do is install, and then go through this very lengthy setup. I'm just kidding. It's just this, I promise. So all you have to do is copy and paste this snippet of code into your plugin/index.js, and you're all set up. Next, we're actually going to start writing our test. So at the top here, I'm just setting up the auto record itself. So we're going to require the function that we need, and then we're going to call the auto record right at the top here so that we know that we can reliably record anything else that comes after that function call. So for those of you who have worked with Cypress, this will probably look familiar. But for those of you who have never worked with Cypress, I'm just going to walk through kind of what each of these lines are doing. So here we're really just trying to test the feature that was shown earlier. First, we're going to go and visit the login page, which is at localhost 4200/login. Then we're going to be selecting both the email input and the password input, and we're going to be entering in the login information and then clicking submit. So really you can condense that into a single login function that you can reuse everywhere, but here I'm just showing each of the steps that we're going to take here. And then really the core part of this integration test is really just checking to see if our posts show up. So here in the last two lines, I'm checking to see if there's our post component and then making sure that it's the right component. So I'm checking the title to see that this is the correct post that I expect. So it's time to run the test. This is what happens on the first time you run your test. So Cypress Auto Record is going to connect your application to your real backend on its first run through, and it's going to listen and record every single API interaction that has occurred during the runtime of your test. Then at the very end here, you see the write file. So this just indicates that it's able to record all of the APIs that happened during this test and then write it to a local file. And this is what our local file looks like. So Cypress Auto Record is automatically going to generate this JSON for you, and it's going to include all the information about all of the APIs it's hit in the duration of this test. So then, when we run our test for the second time, we can see that we're no longer relying on the actual backend. All of our routes have now been stubbed, and we're using the mocks that we've just acquired. So, like I said earlier, it's very difficult for us to, mocking and recording is one thing, but being able to manage and update these recordings can be really challenging. So one of the features that is available for Cypress Auto Record is the ability to automatically force record any test. So here, when I inserted the square brackets R at the beginning of a test, I am indicating that even if this particular test already has mocked data, I want to override that and re-record. This way, when our API changes or when our test changes, we're not stuck with old mocks that are no longer relevant, and this will just rewrite over that. So it doesn't have to be super challenging to write integration tests. And if we're able to actually scale this out to the features that we're building, we get a lot of really positive outcomes. So one of the outcomes that we get is that now we have confidence that the features we ship are actually working because we're testing against the acceptance criteria. We're also confident that any existing features that we built are going to continue to work when we do refactoring or we add new features, because we already have all those tests, and all we have to do is to rerun them. This eliminates the need to have to do extensive manual testing on the same features over and over again. And that frees up so much time from our developers and QAs to do more important feature work and to allow our QAs to do manual testing on edge cases that we usually don't have time for, or do more exploratory tests. More importantly, I think this really allows everyone on the team to speak a common language about quality. So we're not just, quality isn't just the responsibility of the QA or the developer anymore. Everybody can get involved because we can all understand what's being tested and what are the steps that it takes to get the pass or the fail from our tests. And because we're no longer writing these tests after our whole features are developed or our whole flow or whole epic is done, we're really preventing bugs here, and we're not just simply catching them. And this can save a lot of time during our development process. So thank you, everybody, for your time. I've provided a couple of links for you to check out. So there's the Cypress doc for anyone who's interested to take a look, as well as the Cypress auto record. You can find that on the GitHub with a couple more details on how you can use the plugin. And then also, if anyone's interested to check out the demo itself that I showed here, you can find that at /Nancy/integration test/demo. So you can run the test and see how it's done for yourself. And lastly, don't forget to check out the Wrangle booth. I'm going to be there after this talk. So if anyone has any questions or want to just chat about Cypress, I'll be there. Thank you.